one of the All Blacks' most anticipated test matches of the year is taking place this Saturday at Eden Park. All Blacks versus Springboks, a battle as old as rugby itself, just about. So today on New Zealand Sporting History, we wanted to look back on some of the great All Blacks Springboks moments. And who better to discuss this with than legendary sports journalist and broadcaster Phil Gifford, who's on the line now. Phil, kia ora to you.
Hello, Emile. How are you?
I'm very well, thank you, mate. We've been talking about applause today. You'd quite like a 23-minute standing ovation, I would think.
Yeah, I'm thinking it does, when you think about it, there's no logic in tapping a screen, is there?
No, there isn't. But I suppose, these arcane little rituals that humans have are what makes life interesting, aren't they?
Indeed.
That's one way of looking at it. All right. Well,
yes.
Very exciting match coming up this weekend.
Yes.
Do you get fizzed for All Blacks Springboks matches, regardless of where and when and the context around them?
Well, it's a bit sad considering how aged I am, but I actually get quite excited before every big test matches.
Mm-hmm.
But these ones in particular, yes. I think this is an extremely interesting game. Interesting coaches with Razzie Erasmus and Scott Razor Robertson. And, of course, most of all, really, history that goes back to 1921, for goodness sake.
Yeah. It's a long and legendary rivalry. And, well, speaking of long, some fabulous streaks up for grabs this weekend. The last time the All Blacks lost at Eden Park, when was that, Phil? I think I was about 2 years old.
In 1994, they lost the game to France at Eden Park. I was at that game. It was a very different game from what I would imagine Saturday nights is going to be. It was the French. So, of course, the French being the French, they won by scoring a try that became known as a try from the end of the world, where what felt like about 20 people handled. They left the poor old All Blacks absolutely stunned and bemused. But the game on Saturday night, I would have to say I think it's going to be a much tighter, tougher sort of affair. And eventually, ultimately, as very often I think Springbok All Black games are decided, it may well be the forwards who decide who actually win the game.
Let's talk a bit about this rivalry historically.
Yeah,
why do rugby fans get so excited for a New Zealand-South Africa clash? What is the nature of it, do you think?
Well, it's the most extraordinary sort of competition, isn't it? I mean, there are a whole number of things. And as we know, and we may talk about it if you wish, I'm very happy to. There's a dark side to the South Africa-New Zealand rivalry, of course, and particularly with the apartheid and the racist time that goes back for so long with it. But one of the things about it, I guess, is there were two of what could loosely be called British colonial countries, and that's South Africa and us, where rugby became the number one sport, not football, but rugby. And so because of that, and because going way back to the 1905 All Blacks and then going back to the Springboks when they started touring Great Britain, we became better than the Masters. South Africa and New Zealand became the two best rugby teams in the world. And over time, we haven't always been that hasn't always been the case, but it's remarkable really how often it has been. And at the moment, I think, although the ratings are a bit weird, but if you go back to the 2023 Rugby World Cup, who were the two finalists? South Africa, who won it, and the All Blacks.
Way back when this rivalry began, 1921, and as you said, Phil, without putting specifics on it, you've been around for a while, but for a long period of your sports journalism career, you wouldn't have seen any Springboks versus All Blacks matches. So does that perhaps add to the mythology that during this long period of time, South Africa was not playing rugby on the world stage because of the apartheid policies of the South African government, and so there was sort of a mystique around them a little bit?
Yeah, there was a full decade. I mean, we had the infamous 1981 tour, which I covered for the Listener magazine, which is the lowest time of my reporting career as a sports journalist, because it was just an horrific time when our country, New Zealand, was totally divided by a rugby team, for goodness sake. So it was 1981, and then we didn't play against each other again until apartheid, thank God, was starting to be dismantled in 1992. So there was a full 11 years when we didn't play them at all. So that added, I think, to some of the mystique, definitely. And I guess also it was because there was so much bizarre sort of history, and because South Africa were better than us for so very, very long. I mean, God, we didn't beat them in a series until 1956.
Yeah.
We started playing them in 21, as we mentioned. It just makes the whole thing so weird, and bits of it almost insane, really. But when it's been good, and I'm thinking particularly 1995, when it's been good, it's been fantastic. Nothing like it.
They say in the world of boxing that styles make fights. You know, the idea being that
Sure.
a defensive fighter slugging it out against a really attacking fighter who wants to come inside, but makes a fight more exciting to an observer. And I wonder whether it seems in the world of rugby that New Zealand and South Africa have very differing philosophies on how the game should be played, what they prioritise. And, you know, styles make fights. Styles also make great rugby rivalries.
Yeah, they do. And I mean, there has been a time, it's more recently, I think it would be fair to say that the All Blacks have much more wanted to run the ball and actually score tries and win test matches that way. Having said that, to be fair to South Africa, in 1956, I did a story once for a book that I did about great rugby games, and I interviewed a number of All Blacks who played in the 1956 fourth test at Eden Park when a guy called Peter Jones scored a very, very famous try. New Zealand won 11-5, and they won the series for the first time ever, either here or in South Africa, against the Springboks. And the first five for the All Blacks that day was a lovely guy called Ross Brown from Taranaki. And Ross told me that in the whole 80 minutes of that fourth test, he was past the ball 4 times. And he was the first five, for God's sake. The halfback, Ponty Reid, kicked it all the rest of the time.
I mean, it is quite amazing looking back on some early rugby matches. I mean, they're still incredibly skillful, but the tactics, the strategy, the execution of stuff is totally different. The state of the pitch is totally different. The state of the ball is totally different. But the speed and strength is still there.
Oh, yes, no question about it. And look, the other thing about it, too, is when South Africa play New Zealand, the determination to win and the courage on both sides has always been there, right from the get-go. No question about that. These are games going way back in the day, right up to the present day, until you know, the test match on Saturday night. Both teams are desperate to win, and they will go out there and without... It's very hard when you're talking about sport to not get terribly cliche, so I'll try to avoid that if I can, Emile. But basically, the two teams on Saturday night will be typical, I believe, of South Africa, New Zealand teams over all those years, in that both sides will go out there and they will absolutely give it every single thing physically that they've got.
You, happily, have put together a list of what you consider the 10 most impactful All Black Springbok tests. We'll run through a few of those matches because they are it is pretty amazing. But just before we get to that, was it tough putting it together? Because they have played a lot of tests over the years, and it's a pretty even rivalry, all told.
Yes, it is. I mean, the All Blacks have won more tests than South Africa have, but nevertheless, the competition has been intense, exactly as you say, in virtually every game. Yes, it was really tough to put it together because once I started it, like I was asked by the Herald to write it, and then I thought, great, yes, I love that, and I've been lucky enough to, over the years, to see a lot of these test matches, and then I started to try to put it together, and I thought, well, what's my criteria here? Is it how exciting the game was? Is it the quality of the rugby? Is it the result? What is it? In the end, the only match that ultimately was relatively easy, or the two matches that were relatively easy to pick. The low point was the 81 fourth test at Eden Park, and the high point, well, do you want me to say what it is?
Well, I'm sure that people can imagine it, but let's wait for that. Let's actually begin with the low point because, I mean, this was a match again that you were at. So Auckland, 1981, the third test. You've explained a bit about the context around this.
Yes.
But, I mean, the atmosphere, febrile, really, there was so much going on in the background of this socially, culturally. It was more than a rugby match.
Oh, infinitely more. I mean, really, by the end of that, it was the third test and it was the last test. They only played a 3-test series, thank God. They didn't have a fourth test in 1981. And I'd covered the whole test, starting from Gisborne. A brilliant writer called Tony Reid from The Listener and I covered that whole tour for The Listener magazine. And It just divided the country. Again, that sounds vaguely cliched, but it's true. I mean, the night before that test at Eden Park, that third test, what they call the barbed wire test, because the whole of Eden Park, it's a sporting event, for God's sake. And you've got barbed wire rolled around right outside. It looked like World War One. So the night before that test match, I spoke at a function at the Eden Rugby Club just up the road from Eden Park, actually. It was the great Sir Colin Meads and Kel Tremaine, another great All Black forward. Kel Tremaine said to me, and he voiced what I was thinking, I must say, and I think that quite a lot of us, even those of us that absolutely loved rugby, felt. Kel said, look, nobody was keener than me to see the Springbok team come here. He said, now nobody is keener to see them get on the plane and go back home again. He said, because they've torn our country completely in half. And he said, and the worst thing is, I don't think they care.
Right. Yeah, well, I suppose that's in the background of it, isn't it? I mean, someone has texted in, Phil, to say, with deference to Phil, the country wasn't divided because of a rugby team. The country was divided because of the apartheid behind the rugby team, and that's an important thing to remember, I suppose.
Well, yes and no, but I actually totally disagree with that, because
Really?
the rugby team was representative of an apartheid era.
Right, yeah, I see what you mean.
You couldn't differentiate it. It's a sweet idea, the idea somehow the rugby team had nothing to do with apartheid, and I'd just say nonsense, because rugby in South Africa was run on apartheid lines. That's how it worked.
Must have been an amazing match to watch, this one, because this is the one with the planes and the flower bombs and so on, wasn't it?
Oh, yeah. Man, I've never been scared at a rugby game before.
Yeah.
Well, first of all, it was a rugby game I didn't really want to be at, because I loved the game, and I just didn't enjoy it. Secondly, yeah, I wish I could say I was braver, but I came out of the press box because it was as loose as a goose that day. I mean, everybody was wandering around everywhere and everywhere else. I came out and actually stood on. I don't know why I thought it would be safer. I went and stood on the sideline rather than in the stand to watch it, because there was this guy called Mark Jones who had a pilot's license and everything, and he had a mate in the back dropping flower bombs of a Cessna. And my God, he was flying so low that at times it seemed to me that the plane wasn't a great deal higher than the top of the goalpost at Eden Park. And you thought, one wind shear, and this is not going to be a good look.
I think I'm right in saying that Sue Bradford was in one of those planes. I'm sure. I know that Sue listens to RNZ. I'm sure she'll text in and tell me if I'm mistaken there.
I don't think so. There was Mark Jones, and a mate. I don't recall. I mean, I know exactly who you're talking about, but I don't think she was in. Right. No, there was only one plane, and there were two blokes in it.
I must be misremembering. All right. 1981, the third test. That is the darkest day in the history of this great rivalry. That's your fifth choice.
Yeah.
We've about 14 minutes left, Phil. So let's skip 1956. Let's talk about 2015, London 2015. This was high stakes World Cup semi-final, the first time that these two countries had come up against one another in a knockout match since probably 1999, I'd think.
Yes, I believe so. And it was that 2015 All Black team at the World Cup in the UK. I think that's the best All Black team I've ever seen.
Yeah.
And they played such beautiful football. God, they played good football. And so, oddly enough, I know that Steve Hansen, for example, the coach of that 2015 team, when he came to the press conference, he was completely out of breath, and he blamed it on having to run up the stairs to the thing. But he also said yes, and I was a bit nerve-wracked watching the game, because South Africa played a fairly typical sort of game, very tough in the forwards. It was the only game that I can recall during that 2015 World Cup the All Blacks played where the weather wasn't great. Yeah. There was a bit of rain at Twickenham, and the ground was a bit wet, and the ball was probably a wee bit slippery. But bizarrely, I don't know. It's weird. I actually always felt that this All Black team was good enough because it was so strong from front to back. I mean, we had a brilliant back line, but we also had some damn good forwards, you know. And so when the crunch really came, and of course we had Richie McCaw. So there you go. How could South Africa possibly win? So we had Richie led the forwards. They took on South Africa up front. And ultimately, yes, thank goodness, we came out. We came out winners, and went on to, of course, win the World Cup by beating Australia in the final.
I actually think that 2015. So I agree with you. That's the best All Black side that I've ever seen by miles, actually. And I think that there was kind of beauty around it too, because there were so many players who had athletically peaked together probably around 2011, maybe 2010.
Yeah.
But 2015 showed that while the bodies might not be quite as fast and strong as they used to be, the benefit of experience and game management, and there was just a real dignity to that team, I think, Phil.
Yeah, absolutely. There were so many great thinkers in that team, and then you had the occasional guy like Bowden Barrett, who at the time was this bright young thing from Taranaki, who was just absolutely electrifying to watch, and the whole team really was Aaron Smith at halfback. God, it was a good team. And Jerome Kine, we still, I don't believe, there's been some very, very good players played in the blindside flank spot, the number 6 jersey since, but I don't think there's been anybody to match Jerome Kine so far, because, boy, that guy, he was the sort of bloke that if you said to a halfback who was opposing the All Blacks, I want you to run the blindside, a sensible halfback would say, no, I'm not. You run the blindside if you want to get tackled by Kino, but I'm not.
Well, I'm glad that we've agreed that 2015 team's the best that we've seen, Phil, because I'm going to say something mildly controversial, which is that I think that your number 2 pick, the All Blacks 1996 team, I think that's the second best All Blacks team that I've ever seen.
Oh, the team in Joburg that actually won, yes. And I was lucky enough to see all of those test matches in 1996. Yeah, that was a fantastic team, I've got to say. Because, see, I think the most underrated World Cup All Black team of all time by a long way is the 1995 team.
Yeah.
And they were a terrific team. But in 1996, everything came together in a way, in that John Hart took over the team. They went to South Africa, and they had all the great players from 1995, apart from poor old Jonah, who was starting to struggle. Jonah Lomber was starting to struggle a bit with his health. But apart from that, they had this fabulous team. Plus, they had Christian Cullen, and they were just a sensationally good rugby team, and they played really, really good football too. And so, having said all that, again, you see, this gets back to why South Africa, New Zealand, such a wonderful contest. Very, very rarely the media were invited into the changing shed after that test at Johannesburg where they won the series in 96. And I don't think I've ever seen so many exhausted rugby players in one room in the whole of my life. Josh Kronfeld, who I'd sort of known since he was a baby because I was mates with his mum and dad and went to their wedding when we were all kids. And Josh saw me, and like I said, I've known him since he was a toddler, sort of. And he went to shake hands, and he could hardly lift his hand up to shake hands with me. That's how exhausted he was. It was those 96 All Blacks, as they say in the classics. Again, I forgive the cliche, but they left it all on the track.
Yeah, there was the famous occasion too after the test, I think, in Pretoria, which the All Blacks won by a whisker, and you talk about the media being invited into the changing room. Don Clark, the great All Blacks fullback of the 50s and 60s, Don Clark, also invited back there, and a moment that you pinpoint is showing the emotional depth of this rivalry. Yeah,
Don Clark was in tears. He was, for people that don't know who we're talking about, it's a great fullback who went to South Africa in 1960, and they lost the series over there. He was the fullback when they won the series in New Zealand for the first time in 1956. He'd gone to live in South Africa, and yes, he was there, and he was crying, and he was a fair dinkum Waikato farmer originally. He wasn't the sort of bloke that burst into tears very easily, but that's how much it meant to him.
The number one, I'm sure that most people out there with any passing familiarity of rugby will be able to pick this one. But, number one, it's 1995. It's the World Cup final. Just before we get stuck into this, what is the sort of political, social context surrounding this? The apartheid policies of the South African government have been taken down by this stage. Nelson Mandela is the president, and we're 30 years on now, but this is momentous on the global stage, isn't it, Phil?
It is the most extraordinary thing. I mean, I've never been at a game or any sporting event, actually, that was even remotely like it, really, because it was so much bigger, really, than just the rugby game. So you've got, like, before the game started, there was a lovely guy called Dan Retief, who's a South African journalist that was out here in '81, and we became friends. And Dan, before that '95 final, said to me, "Phil, something really big's going to happen today." And he said, it's going to be massive. He said, it's going to make the plane flying over Eden Park in '81 look like chicken feet. I went, oh, okay, that's interesting. So then the Boeing 747 flew over really low before the game. I could see Dan in the press bench across from me, and I go, is that it? No, bigger than that. What do you mean bigger than that? And I turned around behind us, and the crowd's going nuts. And behind where the press bench was, in the official section, is Nelson Mandela and Francois Pienaar's Springbok jersey, for God's sake. Mm-hmm. And then Dan yelled out and said, I told you to be bigger than '81. And it was. It was the most amazing sort of situation. Then, of course, President Mandela went out and shook hands with all the teams, and the crowd was just going ballistic. And you've got to understand, this was a strange time in South Africa. Like Johannesburg is a very dangerous, or was, I guess it still is actually from everything I read. I haven't been there for a few years. But in 1995, Johannesburg was an extremely dangerous city. You could hire an AK-47 for a day for $10 and you got 6 bullets as a bonus. Mm. And so that's the sort of place that it was. It was scary as hell. And at night time, we were all warned by the South African Rugby Union press guys, don't go out at night by yourself unless you're in a whole group, and preferably with armed people with you. Don't go out at night. Now, here comes this test, and suddenly, for about 24 hours, the Rainbow Nation, as they were calling it, which was a lovely phrase, Rainbow Nation, just very briefly, thanks to a rugby game of all things, actually felt like it might be real.
They say sport and politics don't mix, but they're sort of inextricable, really, aren't they, in reality?
Yeah, they are. And sometimes it's a depressing thing, and sometimes it's happened that day and that evening. It's actually a lovely thing, a wonderful thing. Sport can somehow sort of show that sort of anything is possible sometimes. Now, how long it lasted for, I don't know. I was gone about 3 or 4 days after the final. I was finishing a book with Mike Brewer, and then I flew back to New Zealand. But I've got to say that on that day and on that evening, just everywhere you looked were smiling people. And that's one rugby game does that, which was kind of crazy, but lovely.
Do you think, with the benefit of hindsight, it's a good thing that South Africa won that game?
You know, it took me, and it's pathetic really, because I was behaving like an 11-year-old child, really, I was, but it took me at least a decade to concede that, yes, it was a good thing that South Africa won that game, actually. Yes, it was. And even now it feels strange saying those words to you, especially on national radio.
I think it's okay.
Nevertheless,
it's okay. It was 30 years ago, Phil. You'll get away with it.
Okay, thank you. Yes, it was really, and it was the most momentous. And it also, as it happened, it also coincided with the thing that until Nelson Mandela arrived on the day of the game, until that happened at the final, it seemed like the biggest thing that had ever happened in the history of rugby had just happened, because the day before it had been announced that rugby was turning professional.
That's right.
So,
yes.
So you have Friday, rugby turns professional. Saturday, Nelson Mandela arrives and unites the nation. So yeah, put it all together. That was a massive 48 hours for footy, wasn't
it? Yeah, a watershed moment actually in the history of modern rugby. It's fair to say. Now,
Indeed.
On Monday, Phil, just a couple of minutes left, but on Monday something interesting happened. South African rugby formally apologised for the exclusion of Māori and presumably Pacifica players from touring apartheid-era South Africa. I'm interested in your thoughts on that apology, which seemed to me to sort of come a bit out of the blue.
Yeah, it's a strange time to do it. As in, I agree that because, you know, rugby in South Africa has been fully racially integrated for a long time now. As you just have to say, you can see it just from looking at the Springbok team, and looking at their teams when they play inside South Africa. Look, as they say in the classics, I suppose, better late than never. But when you look back on it, the history of it, and you go way back to 1949. The great Sir Fred Allen, who in later years of his life, I used to live not far from him on the North Shore in Auckland, and I used to see quite a lot of Fred. And he was the captain of the 1949 all-white team that went to South Africa during the apartheid era. I think it was pre-apartheid. It wasn't official, but it may as well have been. And as Fred said, hindsight's a wonderful thing. He said, but in hindsight, and I quote, those who knows Fred will know this, he probably used stronger language in this. He said, we should have told him to get stuffed. And I actually agree. But yeah, I mean, nice idea. And I gather as a sort of an apology, as a gesture, they are inviting possibly a New Zealand Maori team to tour South Africa, which would be interesting.
That would be interesting, wouldn't it? All right, well, we'll look forward to this weekend, and hopefully the All Blacks can preserve this legendary streak at Eden Park and against the Springboks at Eden Park. Phil Gifford, it would be remiss of me not to ask you for a prediction, please.
All Blacks by 4.
All Blacks by 4. Okay.
I don't know why it's 4. That just figure popped into my head. But look, to be blunt, the All Blacks by 1 would do, man.
It'll be one to look out for, that's for sure. All right, Phil Gifford, always really nice chatting to you, Phil. Thank you.
Thank you.
That is Phil Gifford. And if you'd like to read Phil's top 10 list in a bit more detail, there is a piece on the New Zealand Herald in which he goes through the top 10 tests between the All Blacks and the Springboks as determined by him. We heard 4 of the top 5 here, but there are some other legendary matches between these two great rugby nations as well.